This is a BGP demonstration. I will start with the application open and dismiss the welcome window. I will go to Connect to Chassis and Reserve Ports. From there, I'll expand the appropriate chassis. I'm going to use ports 1 and 2 on slot 2. Notice how the test configuration window is now populated with the ports. I'm going to select all ports. And under the Main tab, select the appropriate media type. Ethernet copter is what I will use. From the Port Config tab, I'm going to select the correct physical layer parameters for my device under test. In this case, I'm not using auto negotiation, and the ports are set to 100 meg full duplex. Next, I'm going to create some devices to use for my BGP routing emulation. From the All Devices grid, I'm going to select Add. And that launches the Create Devices window. From there, I'm going to select both ports. I'm going to select the Routing and MPLS checkbox. And of course, I'm going to create a BGP router. Notice once I've done that, Configure BGP shows up under the steps. I'm also going to select to automatically generate routes for those routers at the end of this Create Device Wizard session. Notice my encapsulation has to be IP. In this case, it's IP version 4, and I'm not using any VLAN tags. From Configure Devices, I'm going to create one device per port. I'm going to select an appropriate router ID. In this case, I'm going to use the IPv4 address as the router ID because that is what my device under test is expecting. I'm going to accept the default MAC address, but be careful that you don't duplicate those. For the IP address, I'm going to configure the device on the first port to be 192.168.11.3, again, because that's what my device is expecting. Click in the IPv4 gateway and notice the gateway is going to be .1 by default, and that is what it needs to be. As far as my device on my second port, I'm going to use the step, and I'm going to use a per port step of 0.0.1.0 since my prefix length is /24. Select OK. Under my Configure BGP, I'm going to select the appropriate BGP parameters. Just a quick glimpse at how my device under test is configured. Notice my device under test is BGP Autonomous System 1 and the peers that it is expecting. In fact, on the first port, I'm going to use the first device I created, 192.168.11.3. Notice its autonomous system is 2. On the second port, I'm going to use 192.168.12.3. Notice its autonomous system is 3. So I'm going to use my gateway as DUTIP because we're doing a directly connected BGP session, and I'm going to be peering with my DUT's interface IP address. It's eBGP. The autonomous system of the first device on the first port is going to be 2. And I'm going to step per port by 1. And my DUT's autonomous system is 1. Notice I'm not using any 4-byte autonomous systems. I'm not using authentication or any other parameters. And now when I go to preview, I can see everything that I have configured. I can see my two devices, their router IDs, which are the same as their IP addresses because that's the way I selected, their MAC addresses, their gateway, the BGP autonomous system they're associated with, and the DUT's autonomous system that they will peer with. Now remember I selected to generate routes from here, so when I select Finish in the Create Devices wizard, it's automatically going to pull up the BGP route generator. And I'm going to use the BGP route generator to create BGP routes for each device on each port. Select Next. Total number of routes to create. Let's just say 100 for this example. And I'm not going to duplicate any on the ports. So I'll have 50 routes on one device, 50 on the other. There's a lot of different ways to specify which routes I want to generate, including the start IP prefix as well as the ending IP prefix. Of course, this range is much larger than I'm going to need because I'm only generating 100 routes. I'm going to distribute the routes fixed, so they're just going to go incrementally based on a /24 prefix. And we'll see that in a moment. And since I'm not doing any duplication, I don't need to append any AS path information either. Select Finish. And so now we can preview what we have. Under our All Devices, our Emulated Device Interface, these are common parameters that would apply to anything, even if you were just using the device to generate traffic. Or if you're using the device for multiple protocols, this information would apply to everything. So in other words, what encapsulation are we using? The router ID that we'll use. What MAC address the device interface is using, its IP address, IP prefix, its gateway, and so on. So these are common parameters for traffic-only devices, for my BGP parameters, as well as if I was emulating OSPF or other even host protocols such as DHCP. For my BGP parameters, from my BGP tab, you can see the parameters that were set in the device wizard. My autonomous system numbers, the IP version 4, my DUT autonomous system numbers, my DUT's IP address, some other parameters that I ignored. My hold timers were automatically set appropriately, although I can change this to match the DUT or not if I want to. And you can see there's other parameters, including enable view routes, which I'm going to go ahead and select those and show you what that's all about. You also want to be sure that your BGP session is using either your interface IP or your router ID. In this case, they're both the same, so as long as it's configured that way in my DUT, then it's happy. Notice I have 100 total routes, 50 of them spread on each port. And in fact, if you remember, the route generator was launched automatically. I can get back to the route generator if I want to. And I can add more routes. In this case, I'm not going to. I'm going to cancel. I could also view the routes that were created or add more routes one at a time. So you can see here device 1 is selected, but I can select both devices. So I can see them both in the same view. So notice my 50 routes were actually added as a block on each device, a block of 50 each. So a block is one or more. In this case, since they are sequentially oriented, I can add them all to one block. Instead of having 50 rows of one, I could have one row of 50, which is fine. They don't necessarily have to be sequential. The increment is set to 1, but I can set it to 2, and what would that do? It would skip routes in between and avoid aggregation by the DUT. Another key about setting up everything as a block is all the attributes. Notice the AS path, segment type, next hop, and so on would apply to all 50 of those routes. So if I wanted different routes with different attributes, I'd have to create them as different blocks. And of course from here I could always add routes if I want to. In this case, I'm not going to bother. just to show you how you can use either the route generator or the Edit BGP Routes window to add and edit routes. So now my BGP configuration is complete, and I'm ready to start my devices. As with anything, the first thing I'm going to do is select Apply. Once the configuration has been applied, I can see my results windows have come up. I could also look in the log, and I can see how object changes have been applied. I have different counters, my port level basic traffic results, and my actual test traffic, my streams, detailed stream results. At this point, I don't have any test traffic configured. We just have our BGP routers and their routes, but I'll show you after we bring up the sessions how we can send traffic to and from those routes. For now, I'm going to change this result view to a BGP result view by selecting Change Result View, Routing and MPLS, and BGP Results. And I'll go ahead and drag this over so I can see more of the results in view. And now what I want to do is start my devices. In other words, bring up my BGP sessions. So there's a variety of ways of doing that. If I want to just bring up one of the routers, I can right click on that one and go to BGP and start BGP. If I want to start both of them, I can select both using this handle here, or my shift or my control keys, and then start my devices, or right click, and then when I start BGP it will start for both of them. Or I can just use my Start All Devices button here. Also notice how in the BGP results window I can start one or more, either just BGP or the whole device. The difference is this would start the BGP protocol only. This would start, as well as my Start All Devices from the main toolbar, all the protocols that are configured on that device. In this case, it wouldn't matter either way because BGP is the only protocol configured. So I'm going to go ahead and start my BGP device. You can see the router states going from active and then established. And then we can see our statistics. Since we did establish the routes, we have advertised and received routes, but we can also scroll over to see our open messages that we've sent and received, our keep alives that we've sent and received. Knowing we're established, we can see that in the Spirent TestCenter application. We could also see it in the DUT. Notice when I select the DUT's interface, it shows that the neighbor is up. I could also look inside the DUT and I can see I have BGP routes advertised. Remember before that we selected the option to view routes for BGP? What I can do is I can select one device, go to BGP, and go to View IPv4, IPv6 routes. And then I can see how the routes were re-advertised from the DUT to my BGP emulated router. And I can double check the attributes in either this text view or a table view. I could even export those for comparison to a CSV file. There's also another emulation feature besides just counting protocol events or viewing results or looking at router states. I could actually go to my log and I can turn on protocol events. So in this case, I'm interested in looking at BGP protocol events. And I can select one device or the other. I'm just going to select one because all the messages will get mixed up in the log window. And if I really want to pinpoint one device, then I don't want to mix it up with the other device's messages. Notice that when I do that, then it starts to show up in the log the BGP messages associated with that device. Well, I also mentioned that there's a way now to send traffic to and from those routes. So I can create a stream block. A stream block is a traffic profile in Spirent TestCenter. So I'm going to select my All Stream Blocks window and add. It's going to bring up the traffic wizard. I'm going to select both ports. And notice how, as potential endpoints for traffic, I can select my routes that I've advertised with BGP. In this case, I'm going to associate them as a bi-directional pair. So it was real easy to set up my BGP devices. It was real easy to add routes to them. Now all I need to do is select those route blocks as a potential source or destination of traffic. I could also page through the traffic wizard to see the other attributes of the traffic. I'm actually not doing any MPLS binding, so I can ignore that. The frame sizes that I'm using for this traffic. If I wanted to add some additional information to the frame, keeping in mind that my traffic is already going to have a frame header, an IP header, but if I wanted to add, let's say, a TCP or a UDP header to the traffic as well, I can certainly do that. In addition, what load am I going to be sending my traffic at? In this case, I'm going to just accept the default of 10% load and select Finish. So notice now I have my stream blocks, a separate one for each port, where on the first port it's stream block 1-1 going from the source route block to the destination route block, and really on the second port that is swapped, so it's traffic in the reverse direction. I'm going to select Apply, and I'm going to change my results view to my detailed stream results because now I'm interested in seeing my traffic results. Notice that it actually created a separate stream and ID for each of these endpoints. So in fact, this is a block of 50. There's actually a total of 50 times 2, because there's 50 in each direction, or 200. So keep in mind, the detailed stream results only shows 25 streams in a page. If I have 4 pages of 25, that would be 200. So we verified from the devices route table that the routes are there, but now we're going to be able to apply and verify that the traffic can actually get through. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ARP for my traffic so I can resolve my gateway's MAC address. And you can see in the status bar all ARPs resolved successfully. And now I'm going to start my traffic using the Start All Traffic on All Ports button from the toolbar. And so I can see my TX and RX frame counts and my detailed stream results. I can go to my advanced sequence tracking and I could actually have a real-time counter checking for drop frames. Keeping in mind this is the first page of 4. I can page through each one and see if all my traffic is getting through. And so there you have it, an easy way to send traffic to the routes that you're advertising. I'm going to go ahead and stop the traffic and show you one more trick for BGP as far as setting up routes are concerned. So I'm going to go back to my devices window and remind you that we had 50 routes on each port, 100 routes total. What I can do is there's a wizard for importing a BGP route table. So if I go to my wizards, routing and MPLS, BGP, route table import, this will enable me to take a route table that I collected as a result of, let's say, a show IP BGP on a router, and I can import that to my emulated router, and then it will re-advertise those routes with all the attributes and everything that I got from the output of my real router. So looking at that route table, I have a text file saved. So you can see as a result of this show IP BGP, I have a number of routes in there. and the attributes, next hop, AS, path, and so on. And then what I can do is I can associate that with one of my other devices. I'm going to browse to the file. I just left it on the desktop. And you'll notice the different router types that we support. So depending on the output of which one, you'll select that appropriately. Do you want to add your own AS or not? So if you don't, you'll just emulate as though you were that actual router that we took it from, and or add your tester IP address to it. And you can limit, because that was actually a rather large route table. So I'm kind of limiting just how many routes I'm going to import for that. Select Finish. And you could even add to your existing routes that you configured some other way, or delete them. I'm going to go ahead and delete them, so all we have is the routes left over from the route table. And we can see that there's a summary of how we've imported. So even though there were 7,200 routes in the file, I only added a certain percentage of them because of the limits that I placed. And you can see that they now show up on my first device. I can go to select that device, go to Edit Routes, and I can see how all those routes were applied. You can see that some of the routes had the same attributes, so they've been aggregated into a route block. Some of them had different attributes, so they were imported individually, and all the individual attributes of those routes are viewable. So we'll re-advertise those routes just as we got them from that real device in the real world. And in fact, from a traffic perspective, I could even go and create traffic where all I need to do is select the device, and all the routes associated with those are a potential source or destination. In this case, I selected them as a source. And then I can take my route block on my other port, create a similar bidirectional pair as I did before. And notice that you have all the routes and then all the traffic, so you can verify not only did the device receive the routes, but is it actually forwarding traffic appropriately. I can overwrite or add to what was already there from a traffic perspective. So notice my existing stream blocks were already there, but now I have some new stream blocks. Now the key is I added those routes to an existing device. When I select Apply, we would go ahead and advertise those routes automatically, especially since the router state was up.